Cern Basher has been traveling around the country in his Cybertruck and tells me that he got version 13 and now he thinks it's pretty darn good.
I do. I do. I think it's promising. I've had one drive in it, so I'll reserve my judgment for future drives. I have a little drive coming up later today, so perhaps the next time we speak, Randy, I'll give you my thoughts.
And how was version 12 point whatever as you drove around the country as you
12.5.5 was fantastic. I really loved it,
Mhm.
except that it had a bad habit of pulling out in front of traffic when it was making a right-hand turn.
I see.
Yeah. And so,
Did it
and
accelerate quickly?
no,
No.
no, one time was in front of a cement mixer.
A cement mixer.
Yeah, probably doing about 60 miles an hour, and it kind of leisurely pulled out in front of it. Another time I was giving somebody a FSD ride
Yes.
and pulled out in front of another car. So that wasn't good. It wasn't a good look.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
I
hoping
was
version 13 doesn't do that.
I was fortunate. I took my two of my grandchildren on a ride 4 years ago when I first got the car, and it was not good. It was terrifying. It was like, it was back in the day. And so they wanted to go this time. So I was just over and they wanted to go now. And I took them out and it was flawless.
Yeah.
It went all city streets, at night, and they were like blown away by how good it was. So yeah, a lot of change in 4 years.
The best part about it was driving through Atlanta both ways and just letting FSD handle Atlanta traffic.
Yeah.
Um, that was great. That was worth every penny.
My sense is that the interchanges in Atlanta are impossible. My
It's a mess.
recollection is you're like, with that interchange, this
Yeah.
another, I got to make another change on this interchange. I mean, I feel like I was always spinning my head around trying to figure out if I was going the right way.
It's a giant bowl of spaghetti,
A giant bowl of spaghetti.
which is actually a bit of a theme in our slides today.
I see. Is this a transitional point?
Well, sort of, but we're not going to go there just
No, not
yet.
directly to spaghetti.
Not directly. We have a bit of a smattering of different topics today.
Okay, all right.
We'll see if we can weave this all together. This could be a challenge.
All right. We've got so many metaphors going. I'll just throw in. So it's like a potpourri.
Potpourri.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
So let's start this journey off with a birthing of a Cybertruck through the new tunnel at Giga, Texas.
I have not seen this yet.
Isn't that beautiful?
That is something.
Yeah. My truck wasn't born this way. My truck was more of a test tube baby that was maybe a CT section, I guess.
Yeah, I see a CT section.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. Sorry. Hopefully the jokes get better as we go. Speaking of sort of the holiday theme, I thought this was a good one. A little girl sitting on Santa's lap and she says, "For Christmas, I want a dragon." And Santa says, "Be realistic." And the girl says, "I want FSD in Europe." And Santa replies, "What color do you want your dragon?" So, Jan of the EV universe, I feel your pain. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, yeah. Those certain, I do have a theory on that. I don't know if you've heard it while you were driving around the country. My theory is that Elon has said it out straight out. He said, look, when we have the numbers, when we can show the data, it will be immoral or unethical or,
Yeah,
to not approve it. And he now has friends in high places all throughout Europe.
he does.
And he also has some power that he didn't have before when he's talking to these folks in Europe. So I just have a suspicion that the UN, the European Union, the United States, China will all fall in line over the next few months. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's quite likely when one of your new best friends has control of the nuclear codes, I think you probably do have a lot of power. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. No,
Yeah.
no, I'm hopeful too. I think the product will speak for itself and it will make sense for regulators to approve. Europe tends to be a little slow on things,
Yep.
so it may take a little bit longer, but I think Europe will come around. Yep. Yeah, a little patience is needed, I think, here.
Right.
Speaking of gifts, this was from today. SAIA has taken delivery of some of its first Tesla semis.
Yes.
And this is pretty exciting. The color of the truck's kind of cool. It's kind of a Tesla red. So you'll probably see some of these on interstates at some point soon.
Yeah, they only bought two, and they didn't indicate how many more they were going to buy, but it was certainly nice to see, another brand out there. I'm sure that as this year progresses, we'll see lots.
I think we'll see lots, and they must have certainly ordered a bunch in order to be one of the early customers to take delivery. So they must have a pretty sizable order, I think.
Hmm.
I don't know what the number is.
Right, right.
All right. Well, that was today. What about yesterday, Randy? What happened yesterday?
There was some Federal Reserve thing. I don't know. They
Yeah,
they're all shock and awe with their, maybe only two cuts in 2025. And then Roger Ferguson, an ex-member, came out this morning and says, I'm not sure there'll even be two.
right. Yeah, and it caused a little bit of a fit in the financial markets. And one way to measure that is to look at the volatility index, the VIX.
Right.
And yesterday was the second largest one-day increase in the history of the VIX.
Wow.
And that's without any kind of true crisis. I mean, it was just a
Yeah.
few words.
Yeah. Yeah.
A 74% increase in the VIX. The VIX has come back down a little bit today, last time I checked. But the good news is, whenever the VIX spikes like this, we tend to have pretty good results in the financial markets in the following, 3, 6 months, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Ah,
Generally, there's always a few exceptions.
sure.
But you can see the 2 and 3 year column there. There's only one exception.
Hmm.
That was in 2007 when we did truly have a crisis on our hands brewing.
Right.
Yeah. So this is another one to watch. We had a similar kind of event. Actually, the third highest increase now is back on August 5th. So now
Right.
we've got two gray rows there where we're waiting to fill out this data and see what the results are from these periods. But seems like there's some traders with a itchy trigger finger these days.
Yeah, and I feel like yesterday's was really a knee-jerk reaction. I don't see anything at all. In fact, this morning the housing numbers came out, the existing home sales, and the commentary from that group that puts out the numbers was that numbers are up, the sales are up, even though it's November sales, which is normally off season. The last season was very strong. The off season was very strong, and now it's even strong, even more numbers this year. And he said basically that the consumer is getting used to 6 to 7% mortgages.
Mhm.
And I've been saying that for a year and a half that
Yep.
is going to happen. So to me, there was a huge overreaction yesterday to this business.
Yep. Yep. I agree with you. Now, that said, inflation expectations have gone up since September and remain pretty high. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes, particularly as this new DOGE committee starts to, take a little bit of a hatchet to government spending.
Right.
That would be interesting to see how this impacts this. Um, but, it makes sense. And then also we see the 30-year yield is also pretty high right now relative to where it was.
Very high. Yes.
But this bounces around quite a bit,
Sure.
you know. So that's all good. Creates some opportunities in the markets for folks.
Right.
Speaking of spaghetti,
Okay.
we have this chart. So this is the implied rate forecast over time versus what rates have actually done in the dark blue line. And to
Oh,
me, it looks like somebody has thrown spaghetti on the wall and,
yeah.
to see what sticks.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can see that, whoever's making interest rate forecasts is probably wrong. Um, it's very hard to forecast these things,
Very hard.
right? Um, so I don't know. Normally, when the Fed cuts rates, they have to cut more than people realize. And this time, it seems the expectations are quickly changing, and for the Fed not to cut rates a whole lot, we'll see. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Well, again, I think your point, which you made briefly, is that if Doge, well, there's two huge impacts potentially coming in 2025. One is Doge and the other is AI
Yeah,
of both the uh, large language model type and the embodied type, which is the
right.
robotaxi. Now, robotaxi, if we roll out, even if we rolled out 100,000 of them this year, it wouldn't have a huge impact on productivity this year, but it would be a directionality. It would be something for the markets to look at and say, oh, if this goes to 1 million, if it goes to 2 million, if it goes to 5 million, it is going to have an impact on productivity long term. We have the potential for a reveal on Optimus, which would have an even bigger, maybe the biggest of all, well, not maybe, the biggest of all impacts on productivity long term. But if the Doge Commission does a few things like it did yesterday, that signals that they're serious and that they have the power to execute, we could see the markets. I think the markets will respond very favorably in terms of interest rates dropping in anticipation of inflation going down.
Most definitely. I guess offsetting that maybe a little bit might be tariffs, right? In
Right.
the short term, inflationary impact from that. But you're right. The success of that commission could have a big impact on inflation expectations for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So we're excited about that. And then speaking of AI and looking forward, um, this is the Magnificent Seven stocks weighting in the S&P 500.
Uh-huh.
It's now, approaching its high of about 34% that it had back in the summer. And this is pretty amazing. I mean, the United States stock market is a massive market, and yet you've got seven companies
Right.
that account for about a third of it.
Yeah.
Pretty astonishing, really.
Now, isn't there a rebalancing coming up tomorrow or next week?
There is for the Nasdaq 100.
Oh, for the Nasdaq. Okay.
Yeah, the QQQs. Yeah. Um, so that's interesting. And then when you look at the impact on the S&P 500 returns this year, the top seven stocks have accounted for more than half of the gains this year.
Wow.
And the other 493 stocks, account for the rest. I mean, it's pretty astonishing. Although not without precedent. I recall this happening in prior years,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
right? This is not the first year that the Magnificent Seven have been leading the market and
Sure.
generating most of the returns.
Yeah.
And it's also true that if you look at it from a global point of view, they account for almost half of the gains. I'm
And,
sorry. No, it's more than half. It's the blue line in this one. 7.4% of the 13% gain in the MSCI All Country Index is from the Mag 7.
and the Mag 7 are all US corporations. And I think when I checked it out, 24 or 25 of the top 30 corporations in the world are US corporations.
I think that's quite likely. Yeah.
Something on that order.
I don't have that number at my fingertips, but that sounds reasonable. Yeah.
Right. So when when the Fed chairman yesterday was talking about the fact that the US economy is doing so much better than other economies around the world, maybe this is a big piece of why.
Yes, it definitely is. It definitely is. Now, there's a couple of things to think about in terms of, going forward. This is a chart of Apple's PE ratio,
Mm.
now over 40 times next 12 months.
Mm.
Now, you know how I feel about PE ratios. We've talked about PE
Right.
ratios before. It's a bit of a shortcut. You're looking at just really the next year's earnings.
Yes.
To me, when you value a company, you look out much longer than that. But
Right.
anyway, this is, people in the market look at the next 12 months PE ratio. And for Apple, it's 40. And when Warren Buffett started buying shares back in 2016, the PE ratio was around 10,
Wow.
right? So, and that's when Apple really started to buy back stock.
Yeah.
So it was very good timing on Warren's part, and they've now trimmed this position. If did I hear recently they got out entirely, or had they just trimmed it?
No, I think they're still in both Apple and Bank of America, although they've been trimming both. But I
No.
I could be wrong on that. I could be wrong.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know the details there either. So anyway, so there's a word of caution there in terms of maybe some of the Mag 7 stocks might be getting a little pricey.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yep.
again, it's a PE ratio thing, and so I thought this was kind of interesting. This is a little bit old now, but it's very instructive. So Morgan Housel back in 2013 did a little study of the Dow 30 stocks in the Dow Jones Index,
Hmm.
which is a terrible, terrible index, but still, it's interesting to look at. And he looked at 1995 and he noted their PE ratio in 1995. And then he asked the question, what PE ratio should an investor have been willing to pay in 1995 to
Ah,
earn an 8% annualized return over the next 17 years?
huh.
Right? So here's the findings for the 30 stocks in the Dow in 1995. So let's just talk about the top one. So 3M had a PE ratio of 22.4, but you should have been willing to pay 36.7 times earnings in that year in
Wow.
order to earn an 8% return for the next 17 years.
Huh.
Okay. Alcoa, it was trading at 10 times earnings, cheap, low price,
Yeah.
but you really should have only been willing to pay about 2.9 times earnings.
Uh-huh.
That's how poor the results were. American Express, on the other hand, it was going for 13.8, and you should have been willing to pay 33. Now, there's a couple standouts in this chart. There was a few, like Chevron. It was trading at 31 times earnings. You should have been willing to pay 78 times earnings back in
Huh.
1995 for Chevron.
Huh.
Cisco Systems was trading at 25 times earnings. You could have paid up to 75 times earnings,
Wow.
74.
Wow.
Okay. Another one that jumps out on here is Home Depot, trading at 35, 36 times earnings. You should have been willing to pay about 77 times earnings. Intel seemed cheap at 8.7. Yeah, you could have paid 15.4 and that would have worked out for you for 17 years.
Wow.
Microsoft was one of the more expensive Dow stocks at 28 times earnings. You should have been willing to pay 68 times earnings for it. Okay. United Health was another standout. It was going for 27, 28 times earnings, and you should have been willing to pay, almost 76 times earnings for that stock.
Very.
So this just goes to show that the PE ratios are pretty useless, right, as a valuation measure at a point in time.
Well, the interesting thing, though, is that as I'm looking down here and trying to make any kind of sense out of a trend line or some kind of it seems to be that people are paying way under value, way more than they're paying over value, at least then in 1995.
Yeah, I mean, the stock market had a pretty good 17-year period, although obviously there was a dot-com bust during this
Right,
period
right,
that would have affected the tech stocks,
right,
particularly Cisco. And then, of course, 2012, that's after
right,
the financial crisis. So actually, there were two really difficult periods during this time
right.
frame.
And still,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
still, yeah. In 1995, the market was probably pretty good because the
yep,
middle
it
banks
was.
were strong. So,
It was. Yeah, it was a very strong year. That the late 1990s, actually, all good years, late
yeah.
1990s. Um, I think maybe one of the lessons for me is, focus on the long term, you
Hmm.
know, and the growth potential for a company over a long period of time, and don't worry about its near-term PE too much.
Yeah.
Um, but
We've done you and I have done that a little bit. You've brought us this. You've brought us the reality a few weeks ago. We should be paying $3,000 for Tesla right now.
well, that's right.
Yeah,
That's right. At least that's what I believe based on the modeling that I've done.
right,
And again, I encourage other people to, you know, build their own models
right,
and see. Don't just rely on a PE ratio and pass judgment that, oh, 40 times earnings is expensive. It may not be.
right.
Or 10 times earnings is cheap. It may not be.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like Bank of America here was going for less than 7 times earnings, but you should have only paid three for it,
Yeah, that's really an interesting one.
right? Now, that one's a bit skewed because 2012 it's still recovering from the financial
Yeah,
crisis,
yeah,
right? So maybe the financials on here that's not so fair, but still it ravaged those companies,
sure, sure.
right? Investors seem to get Coca-Cola pretty well. I mean, they paid 21 times and they should have paid 24 and a half.
Hmm.
Um, Merck, 14, should have paid 16.
Well,
You know,
someone made that point the other day too. Cern, I can't remember who said it, but they were talking about, okay, if you make Coca-Cola, you can kind of look at that and look at who they're selling to and who they're not, and look at the history, and you can, you can extrapolate and make some pretty good guesses. But when you're talking
yeah.
about Tesla, where they have these two new products that are coming, that there's almost no way to even I mean, we speculate, you and I have speculated, we've done it on YouTube, but even our speculation is such such pure speculation because as Elon says, the Optimus is going to change economics.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. Yeah. So we don't know. Um, this is kind of the rest of the article. I'll just pause here for a second and folks can pause their screen if they want to read it, but we just covered this material. And then
Mhm.
here's another page. And then I'll just pause on this screen, which is the last part of it. Again, just to drive home the point, there's far more to valuation than just looking at a simple valuation metric like the PE ratio. Some companies are wildly cheap today, even though they trade at a ridiculously high valuation. And some companies are wildly expensive today, even though they trade at a ridiculously low valuation, in quotes. Right? And if you're picking stocks, it's critical that you tell the difference, but that's the challenge. It's really hard sometimes.
Sure.
Right?
And yeah, and at the opposite end of what's been going on with the things you've just talked about is the Russell 2000, which has not had an all-time high this year.
Yeah.
And so I posted this morning on X. So the question is the Russell 2000 undervalued now because of that? Is it just that this sector hasn't had its run, or has the economy changed with regard to the stocks that are on the Russell 2000? Are we in a new era with regard to companies like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of unprofitable companies in the Russell 2000 that causes a bit of a drag. For me, though, rather than looking at indexes, I prefer to look at it stock by stock.
Uh-huh.
Right. One of the things historically as well, Europe has underperformed the United States. This hasn't persisted for this kind of period of time. Therefore, the implication is that European stocks bounce back.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, maybe, but what companies do they have, and what are those companies doing?
Right.
Right. Things don't just bounce back for that reason. The companies need to cause that to happen. And there's some great European companies, but just to look at a European index to me is it's not really that useful.
Yeah.
Um, So I just tacked on the bottom of this, you keep this in mind as you evaluate companies like Tesla, Nvidia, and others today.
Hmm.
So I thought this was kind of instructive, going back in time.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So speaking of Tesla and Nvidia, let's talk about those two. First of all, here's a chart of Tesla since its IPO, updated to a couple of days ago when Tesla hit like 479 a share.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So if you would have invested $100 on the IPO day, not getting an IPO allocation, but just bought it, after the stock traded on the first day, that $100 would be now 30,138
Hmm.
if you didn't touch it, if you were able to just sit on your hands and not trade. Now, versus the S&P 500 over the same time period, $100 would be 766 in the S&P.
Hmm.
So that would have been an astounding investment return,
Right.
right? Now, compared to Nvidia, and suddenly Tesla investors might feel a little bit jealous, right? Nvidia's $100 in Nvidia from the same time period from Tesla's IPO date
Right.
would be almost 55,000 as of a couple days ago.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so pretty amazing. But if you look at the green line and the blue line, they've crossed over a few times.
Yeah. Looks like a
Tes
helix.
yeah, Tesla investors were ahead at times. Nvidia investors caught up and were ahead at times. And so, we may see this line cross again.
Hmm.
Okay, not investment advice. I don't know.
Right, right, right.
Right. And so if we compare the two, I created this what I call this wealth creation ratio. It's the return on Nvidia versus the return on Tesla.
Hmm.
When the line is above zero, Tesla's doing better. When the line's below zero, Nvidia investors have done better since Tesla's IPO. And so right now that ratio is zero point 0.6, right? It's come back off the floor. So we'll see. We'll see if this bounces up again.
Yeah. I
Okay.
could I could definitely see Nvidia kind of keeping up with Tesla next year, maybe, but I can't see them keeping up after that.
Yeah, I think they'll do quite well, but I think you're right. I think it's going to be hard for Nvidia to have the kind of growth that we expect from Tesla in the coming decade.
Right.
Yeah. Hope I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, it'd be nice. Yeah. Well, no,
Yeah.
you hope that Nvidia does better.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I should be clear about how I'm phrasing that. I expect Tesla to do well. I
Yes,
hope I'm not
yes.
wrong about that. I hope that Nvidia does better than we currently expect as well. Okay, so let's go back in time, and this is courtesy of Charlie at Creative Planning. These are the best performing stocks in the S&P 500 over the last 30 years.
Hmm.
And no surprise, Nvidia is on top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, if you invested $10,000 in Nvidia 30 years ago, that would be worth a mere 38 million today,
Wow.
right? 37.5% annual return for 30 years.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
Although I'm sorry, the 30-year period, I guess, doesn't quite apply to Nvidia because they started, the IPO date was January 22 of
Oh,
1999.
oh, okay.
So sorry, that's only 25 years.
5 years. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. You didn't get a full 30 years of compounding. You've been gypped 5 years of compounding. Monster Beverages has kind of flown under the radar. That's the second best stock.
Wow.
Amazon, no surprise there, I think, to most
Right.
people.
Right.
$10,000 will be worth 27.7 million,
Hmm.
33.3% return per year.
Hmm.
NVR, that's Ryan Homes. That's a home builder. They've done well.
Wow.
Um, Texas Line Pacific Corp, Axon Enterprise. You know what that company does, Randy?
No.
The initial product was the taser.
Oh, wow.
So they've sold, I guess, a lot of
A
tasers,
lot
but
of taste.
they've now branched out into other things.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then familiar Apple. Apple's up 25% per year for the last 30 years.
Huh.
Netflix, no surprise there. It's done well. It's up almost 35% per year since 2002, and so on down the list. And if you go down towards the bottom, fourth from the bottom is Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
It's number 27 on the list of the top 30.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got the greatest annual return.
Hmm.
It started in 2000, IPO was 2010, June 29th, 2010, and it's averaged 45.2% per year since then.
Here. Wow.
When I updated my numbers based on a couple of days ago, the average was 48%.
Hmm.
Um, but you could have turned $10,000 into 2.1 million.
Right.
That's pretty good. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting chart. Of course,
Very.
there are companies that are not in the S&P that also have some great results that are not reflected here. Not every company makes it
Sure,
into
sure,
the
sure.
S&P 500.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There'd be some company called SpaceX.
Well, that's right. Private companies, but also even public companies that
Yes.
aren't part of the S&P.
Yes.
Like, for example, MicroStrategy is not on here,
Yeah.
right? It may be next year at some point.
Sure,
It
sure.
now qualifies. It's just a question of whether the committee will let them in.
Right.
It's now part of the NASDAQ 100, by the way.
Right. Saw that.
Right.
Mhm.
So that'll be something. Okay. So these are Tesla's annual returns since the IPO.
Okay.
So if I hid the name and I said, "Hey, here's an investment that has these returns, what do you think?" I think you'd say this is pretty interesting, right? Um, the IPO price, if you measure it from if you got an IPO allocation, Tesla came public at $17 a share. After all the splits they've had, it's a split adjusted price of $1.13.
Okay. Hmm.
Okay. So in the first year, you would have earned 57%.
Yeah.
And then from there, we've had two down years.
Yeah.
It's surprising to look at it on a calendar basis. It sure feels like we've had more down periods than just two. Right. Now, the worst one was 2022, down 65%.
Right. Right.
There have been plenty of 65% drops along the way, but on a
Sure.
calendar basis, there's only 1 year where it actually dropped that during the calendar year.
In 2020, 743%.
Yeah. Right. So this year, when it was trading at 479, we're a little bit lower than that now, but it was up 93%.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, there's another investment that you and I have been talking a little bit about lately, and that's Bitcoin. And here's its chart
Hmm.
from when Bitcoin pricing started, which was July 16th, 2010, which is interesting because it's just a couple of weeks after Tesla's IPO.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a nice comparison, which one did better.
Right.
And before we get to that answer, here's Bitcoin's drawdowns. You can see it's, extremely volatile historically.
Really.
It's been down more than 80%, four times,
Yeah.
around 80% four times. But here's that same chart for Bitcoin. And the cumulative gain here for Tesla, by the way, it was 423 times. For Bitcoin, it's 35 million times.
Yeah. We talked about the famous pizza story. So
That's right. And on this one, I said, okay, Bitcoin started from such a low number. Let's be fair and let's set the Bitcoin price. If you look at that top row, instead of 0.003 cents,
uh-huh.
let's set it to Tesla's IPO price of $1.13.
Okay.
It still is way ahead of Tesla. Now, this still may not be a fair comparison because Bitcoin back then was tiny, absolutely tiny.
Right, right.
And it's not a company. It's not even the same thing as comparing it to any other company.
Sure, sure.
But still,
That's it. Yeah.
investors could have earned these returns had they invested fairly early on.
Right. And held.
And held.
Yes.
I don't want to take too much of a tangent, but this is a nice chart. I'm not sure if you and I discussed this before, but this may be a little bit dated now. When this chart was made, the total assets in the world were about 900 trillion. Okay. It's probably more than that now. And at the time chart was created, Bitcoin was worth 1.3 trillion. Now it's about 2.1 trillion. And so it's 1/4% of the world's total assets. So as well as it's done so far, it's still a tiny, tiny fraction of the world's assets. And a lot of these assets are store value assets like real estate, bonds, stocks, gold. And so Bitcoin seems to be starting to gobble up some of these assets. And we'll see how far it goes. By the way, this is, continuing on this tangent, this is sort of the holders of Bitcoin. 57% are individuals. As much as MicroStrategy is buying, that's small relative to the total Bitcoin outstanding.
Yeah.
Now, ETFs are becoming a bigger player. That's new as of this year, and they already have about 4% of the Bitcoin. Governments, if governments start to buy more, then that slice of the pie will increase. Bitcoin not yet mined. I don't know the as of date, but back here at the creation of this chart was about 6.6% of the Bitcoin had yet to be mined to get to the 21 million tokens. The creator or the creators of Bitcoin, there's a wallet, Satoshi's wallet. It's about 5%. That'll likely never be touched. And then about 17 to 18% of Bitcoin have estimated to be lost already.
Wow.
So you can imagine if you take away a big slice of the pie, then what's left for everybody else is more valuable.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought that was kind of a neat breakdown of it.
Right.
And I don't know the as of date. I'm sure this is changing, although because it includes ETFs, it's sometime this year.
Right.
And it's probably quite recent. Okay. Switching back to our normal topics. This was today. Apptronic partners with Google DeepMind. And I think this is pretty significant because we saw how Nvidia partnered with a whole bunch of robotics makers, and the likes of Microsoft and OpenAI and I believe Amazon invested in Figure. And now you've got Google partnering with Apptronic. And it makes sense, right? These Magnificent Seven companies, they're all focused on AI. And as you and I have talked, embodied AI is going to be a huge component of that. And so Google was kind of missing from this space, in my opinion. And I guess it looks like they've perhaps chosen Apptronic as their partner in this endeavor. So this is worth watching. This could be a very strong competitor for Tesla and for Figure and others.
I think we're going to know a lot in 18 months.
Yeah.
I think almost all of these companies are planning to start making some quantities in 2025 and maybe larger quantities in 2026. And so as they roll out, it will be fun, quite frankly, to watch whose robots can do what, whose cannot do what, which ones, what kind of ways of paying for them there will be. Will some of them be sold outright and other ones leased or rented? I think to me, the main remaining issue is not whether they can do the job or not. It's how Tesla will eventually charge for them. And you, I think you came to roughly, completely independently of me, you came to roughly the same number that I did like a year ago or longer, at about 60,000 profit per year using using rents as the way to do it. And if that's the case, of course, it would be huge amounts of money. But then you look at 70, 80, 90 competitors, and if some of them decide to sell them, maybe they build them for 20 and they decide to sell them for 60, will that even have, because the TAM's so large, will that even put any pressure on Tesla to decide to sell some as opposed to renting them? Or will Tesla just go, no, our thing is to rent them. That's the way we're going to stick with it. And if you want a Tesla one, that's how you're going to get it.
Yeah, we've had quite a discussion within the Tesla community about that over the last, year or two, year and a half. And this summer, Elon responded to one of my posts and said that they would, sell them in addition to having robots as a service.
Right.
So they're already thinking about two different models. There are definitely some customers that are used to buying capital equipment and want to own their own robots, etc.
Mhm.
And there would be other customers that would just want to rent them. So I think we'll see both models. And I've run the numbers on both, and they look very attractive no matter what scenario you're looking at. In terms of the profits, when we did our valuation exercise, the Randy Kirk Tesla valuation model, I think we assumed it was at $10,000 in profit for the bots. It was way lower than the number that you just cited.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. And that may be true long term, but in the near term, the profitability of the bots could be a lot higher than that.
Right.
And that might drive a lot more near-term movement in the stock price if we have that kind of profitability.
Right.
But yeah, this 2025 is going to be another very interesting year in the robotics space.
Right.
Companies are still pairing up with choosing their dance partners,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, we expect that Tesla will start to produce and deploy robots.
Yeah.
At some small size, I guess. I was going to say at scale. It's not at scale yet. It'll be some small size next year.
Thousands, apparently.
Yeah.
1,000 or thousands is the
Which will
way
be
to put it.
pretty amazing, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's exciting. Now, the good news is that Optimus doesn't seem to be too worried. He's busy driving. This is not my photo. This is pretty cool, but it looks like he can drive the Cybertruck. So Optimus is really improved. But Optimus is also busy working,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Lifting things, moving things around. In this case, looks like somebody's house. Um, Optimus also apparently is a stock trader
Yeah.
and bought Tesla here at 424. So that was a good purchase,
Yeah. Good decision.
right? Optimus apparently likes to sit on the Christmas tree. So that's kind of a cool decoration. Optimus does like to party though, Randy.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it leads to a little bit of problems. I guess, I guess you can think of Optimus as a bit of a teenager, so they're going to go through some years like this, You just hope they come out the other side, better for it. This one, I think, could be suffering a little bit. Hopefully it didn't try to drink this burnt hair. Hopefully it's just knocked out because of the smell. But the good news is he's sleeping it off, right? And all will be good. So yeah, don't be too worried about Optimus, Randy. He's recovering nicely.
He's in good hands.
Yeah, yeah.
So there you have it, huh? There you have
That's
it.
it. That was the
Yeah.
final no. There was no crescendo there at all. No, yeah.
I tried to buy one of those little things. I tried. I really did.
I did twice. When I got a notification they were back on sale, I rushed
Yeah.
on there to get it, and it
Still
was
no.
gone.
Yeah, I know. What are you going to do? I mean, all you can do. I mean, I can remember doing this as a teenager. You tried to call the radio station in order to be able to get your
Yeah.
record played or to get a $10 gift certificate or something. I can't remember, but yeah. And now you're doing the same thing, only you're doing it online in order to get an Optimus toy robot.
Just wait till the real thing's available. That's going to be crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we will all look forward to the day when we do have our own Optimi running around the house. In fact, on Friday night, we'll have a conversation with Phil Beisel again, and Phil is
Hmm.
going to talk about some ways that I had not thought of in terms of how to use them in your household. Because the only thing I could come up with was shoulder rubs, and Phil has come up with some other, very good uses for the robot. So people should check that out on 7:45 on Friday night, tomorrow night. Yeah.
Phil is a very smart man, and he's written some great posts. One of them, I think, was reposted by Elon recently,
Ah,
and so that doesn't surprise me. Phil is definitely worth listening to. He's got some great ideas.
I'm going to have better ideas because I post 30 to 40 posts a day and have been for months. And so far, Elon has not, done the thing for me yet. So I don't know.
Randy, it's not quality. It's not quantity. It's all about quality.
I said that's what
Look
I
at
said.
that.
I'm
Tripped
going to have to
myself up.
post. I'm going to have to post better posts or something. I don't know
Something.
what it's going to take. But all right, CERN. Any last parting words of wisdom?
You know, I wish I had some for
Oh,
you. Maybe next week.
okay, maybe so. Well, I posted one today, CERN. It's one of those things you think about toward the end of the year, and it's a it's a phrase that I have used since my 20s when I was reading all those self-help books. I think it's so valuable that I'm just going to pass it on again right here and now, and that is, today is the first day of the rest of your life.
That is so true, isn't it?
So true. Yeah.
And it's a good thing to be reminded of. I think, we sometimes carry a little excess baggage with us that we shouldn't be.
Yep.
So the sooner you drop that and move forward, the better off you'll be. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's a corollary, which is yesterday was the last day of the first part of your life.
This is getting complicated.
All right, sir.
What about now? What about today, Randy? What's today?
What is that? Today is be in the present. You know, take advantage of all the opportunities you can of the day. So you begin the day by saying, "What will I accomplish today?" You end the day by saying, "Have I done anything of value that I'm proud of today?"
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I have enjoyed being in your presence today, so thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay. My heart, pitter patter, pitter patter. CERN, thanks as always for coming on. We'll see you next time. And to all of you out there, it has been great talking to you.